Why is the continent, which is the richest in terms of resources, the poorest in the world? Welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Please sustain us by turning on your subscription and notification buttons. Thank you. Because of their desire to industrialize, African countries had to depend on their former colonizers for equipment and other machinery which they did not produce. These were expensive, and so the desire of African countries to industrialize was turned into a noose with which to continually strangle Africa. Now, this imbalance of trading is actually what the World Trade Organization was established to ensure. I'm sorry to admit that while it is interesting to see that a Nigerian woman now heads the WTO, the World Trade Organization, that organization has done so much damage to sub-Saharan Africa that I would like to wait and see how much change one single person can make. The WTO, IMF, and the World Bank have been major instruments for the economic oppression and suppression of sub-Saharan Africa and other developing parts of the world. For instance, the IMF and the World Bank are responsible for Africa's lack of self-sufficiency in food production. The WTO is responsible for the agreement on agriculture, which stops African and Caribbean countries from subsidizing their food production, while okaying a country as rich as America and European countries to continue to subsidize their farmers. When you see those African children with empty eyes on TV, usually put up by do-gooder organizations, begging for money on their behalf, remind yourself why the children are starving in the first place. It is because their parents are toiling and sweating on mines and farms from which they cannot carve out a decent living from their toil and sweat. So, how can you sit in good conscience watching news items night after night as young African women and men risk their lives through the desert and the Atlantic to get to Europe after being forced by the same kind of conditions that made that hungry, starving child with empty eyes that you see and donate to on TV? How can the majority of Europeans rest easy at night when they see tens of thousands of young Africans, some pregnant with babies, some accompanied by their young children, in a desperate reversal of the direction of the transatlantic slave routes? How those Africans who had chosen to throw themselves overboard or had died due to the terrible conditions on the slave ships across the Atlantic must be turning in their watery graves at the thought of these young Africans going to be enslaved in Europe. I am really anxious to see how Dr. Ngozi Iweala-Okonjo will ensure that the stranglehold which the WTO has enforced on Africa, the Caribbean, and other developing countries to stop us from industrializing are removed. I can't wait to see what she's going to do about removing those strangleholds. So, why do superpowers give out foreign aid to Africa in billions of dollars every year if they want us to continue to remain poor? You may want to ask. Apologies to American and European celebrities and other do-gooders in advance. Please ask yourself this question. Do you know any poor country in the world that was transformed through aid alone into a rich or even marginally self-sufficient country? Please share the information with me if you can find a country in the world that became self-sufficient through aid. The truth is that rather than eliminate poverty, which should be our target, the insane concept called poverty alleviation, pro-poor strategies, or aid only further increase poverty. Research shows that developing countries in Africa and the Caribbean lose more money annually than they receive through aid, investment, and remittances. By investment, I mean foreign investment. According to an account published in 2017, more than 3 times the amount that Africa receives in aid was taken out mainly by multinational companies who fraudulently misreport the value of their imports or exports to reduce tax. These multinationals exploit the crippling structural adjustment policies of the World Bank and IMF and amass so much wealth from developing countries that often their bank balances are way bigger, many times bigger than the size of many African and Caribbean economies. Now, this wealth does not only allow multinationals to act above the laws of the host countries, but it allows them to coerce effectively and collude with political leaders. And also and this continues corruption. They continue to corrupt the system, which their countries now proclaim loudly as the reason for Africa's poverty. Their governments are, of course, also ever ready to prop up dictators, so long as the dictators do not stand in the way of their continuous exploitation of Africa. So let us look at the issue of corruption and poor leadership, which no doubt, of course, play a role in our problems. However, if we are to believe that poor leadership and corruption are the only reasons for Africa's underdevelopment, then we have to first of all believe that there is something inherently wrong with us as Africans, and that we have an innate propensity for corruption, which is the narrative that these developed countries keep pushing at us. The truth of the matter is that there is corruption everywhere, and Africans are not inherently corrupt by any stretch of the imagination. America is the global capital of kleptocracy, and other developed countries are no different. However, while the systems in those countries have been allowed to evolve, so that there are checks and balances to keep corruption from becoming rampageous, the same cannot be said for developing countries, where corruption and poor leadership have actually been groomed. It's like they've been deliberately entrenched. Now, we cannot get away from the fact that even corruption has been and continues to be exploited to work against Africa. Some have even suggested that the very idea of governments of developed countries giving aid was designed to actually start the corruption process in the developing world in the first place. And it has continued to be used to entrench corruption and prop up poor leaders in the name of, one political ideology or another, in the name of, say, democracy. They prop up, poor leaders. The very things that Africa and Caribbean countries need to end poverty are aggressive industrialization, control of our resources, and fair trading terms, so that we can extract and exploit our natural resources ourselves. It's not rocket science. We need to be able to process our raw materials, our natural resources, and determine the prices at which we sell them globally. As the Yoruba will say, the Chinese do not have two heads. In other words, they are not special. They are a superpower today because they found ways to industrialize. This is why we need to consciously challenge the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO, even when it is now headed by an African woman. We should not cut them any slack until we see that our interests are being ensured. It is not just enough to add a little black and stare. If African economies are allowed to grow, the majority of our problems, be it poor governance, security, patriarchy masquerading as a religion and culture, high unemployment rates, ethnicity, and whatever they may be, these problems will be better tackled if and only if our earning capacities are not hindered by all that we have been talking about here. We will be able to afford to educate ourselves to the same level as the superpowers. With that alone, we won't need anybody to try and teach us about democracy or rule of law. The list of reasons why and how Africa is being impoverished is almost endless. Look at how our land is being destroyed through the exploitation of colonizers and multinationals who extract oil, precious metals, and other resources from Africa. Look at how we suffer as a result of climate change, caused predominantly by the developed countries. There is no getting away from the fact that the global economic, trade, and information systems are set up to continue screwing over developing countries. Even in recent times, unfair intellectual property laws persist. I'm sure you've heard that a European country owned by white people who have nothing to do with Yoruba ethnic group tried to trademark the word Yoruba and therefore stop anyone else, including flesh and blood Yoruba people, from trying to use it. This is the crazy world in which we live in. We cannot get away from the fact that the standard of living in the developed world is being enjoyed on the backs of citizens of places like Sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean. So you are simply living in denial if you are living the good life as a citizen of the developed countries and donating money for aid or even campaigning to save the environment without questioning very vehemently why your government alone, your government along with other global powers insist on perpetrating the kind of unfair trade balance called globalization. The time to insist on Africa's true emancipation is now, not tomorrow. It is today. Thank you very much for watching. Please continue to share your comments and questions with us. Also, please give us a thumbs up and share our videos with your contacts. See you next time.